It's a creation event. That's what the universe is, a self-creation event or self-identification event. You see? And that everywhere in the universe, these self-creation or self-identification events are seeking to occur. They're trying to occur. Particles are being created and annihilated everywhere in the universe. All right? Because they're inheriting this will to exist from the universe itself, and this is a criterion of existence. Without it, existence is impossible. All right? You can't just exist for a second and there not be an operation that maintains your existence, because that second is meaningless. Okay? It's got to be a permanent existence. It's got to be, in some sense, atemporal or eternal. And that's what God is in CT. Basically, God is being equated to ultimate reality, so God is eternal in this sense.
And to get Wittgensteinian, when you say eternal, do you mean infinite temporal length or timelessness?
Basically, we're talking about atemporality, which is timelessness, as you put it. Okay? In other words, it's prior to time. It's pre-temporal in a way. Okay? It just exists as a conatus. It exists as an impulse, as an imperative. But it is not fully actualized without existence and all that goes into it. And these existential criteria are what most physicists and other people leave out of their understanding of reality. But these criteria are logically necessary, and they do, in fact, exist.
Before we get further, some people may be turned off by the use of the word God, so I'd like you to define how you use it, because you have it comports with the general definition of God, but it's more specific.
Well, I've done everybody the favor of making an acronym out of it. Global Operator Descriptor. The identity of reality, or ultimate reality. Okay? As far as personifying it is concerned, anthropomorphizing it, or whatever you want to call it, that follows from the properties of the GOD, of the Global Operator Descriptor. We find out that it has certain properties ordinarily attributed to God by people who have religious beliefs, usually monotheistic beliefs. That's the correct way to look at it. So that's what I mean when I say God. I'm not saying, well, I'm not necessarily the Christian God, the Muslim God, the Jewish God, whatever kind of God, right? I mean the global operator descriptor, and it does have sentience. It is all of the criteria that go into the basic religious definition of God, creating the universe, all the rest of that stuff. These can actually be validly interpreted in the CTMU. The CTMU models those properties. Therefore, God exists.
Now, these tertiary tellers come into existence because of their will to exist, at least from my understanding. But at the same time, at the secondary
level... Because of the
level,
universe's will to exist.
At our level, it seems like not everyone has a will to exist, which you also mentioned is equivalent to evil, or at least cognate with it. Is it possible for a particle to have an anti-will to exist?
Most people who commit suicide basically have no will to exist. They're not anti-existence. Okay, so suicide is not necessarily evil in the sense of a mass murderer who tries to destroy civilization and the human species. They're not quite the same thing.
Can a particle commit suicide in a sense? Can a particle have a suicidal will?
A particle does not have sufficient self-modeling capacity to make that decision for itself. That's why we require secondary tellers. They have the self-modeling, the advanced self-modeling capacity to be able to make decisions of that complexity, and only they can do it. That's why they're necessary. That's why we have to be quanta, coherent quanta in this universe.
Can you talk about what good is defined as and what evil is defined as?
Well, basically, good is what reality as a whole wants. Teleology, the will of God. The people have many terms for it. Okay, and evil is its opposite, the negation of it. Simple as that.
And good wants
self-actualization and self-identification. That is what the universe is doing. It is one huge, massive self-identification event. Everything in it, all of the events are self-identification events that go into its self-actualization.
What's meant by self-actualization? That's a term that some New Age people use, and let's delineate it.
Well, okay, well, as physicists would call it a quantum wave function collapse. Okay? The quantum wave function, something is according to the Schrodinger equation, you've got a quantum wave function. It expands, it's radiating out into space, and then suddenly, poof, it collapses. That's inner expansion and collapse. Okay, that's a conspansive meta-event. All right, this is what the universe is made out of in the CTMU. You're no longer just looking at particles, you're looking at more advanced kinds of quanta that are much, much easier to tie together in the conspansive manifold.
I tend to get bogged down in words, so I'm going to press you sometimes, and it may seem unduly persnickety. But when you say self-actualize, is it not the case that there's only self-actualization, not just actualization, because the universe is itself?
That's correct. That is correct. Everything is self-actualization of the universe, if not necessarily of you.
Can you explain your thoughts on this, on the human singularity versus the technological singularity?
The tech singularity. Right. Well, the human singularity, it's all about human destiny and how responsibility for human destiny is distributed. All right? If there's a tech singularity, if there's a human singularity, we all get to participate in the decision about our destiny and where it's going and how to realize it. All right? That distributes the whole thing over humanity as a whole, and no one gets left out. If we have a tech singularity, everything will be controlled by the people who own the technology. Those are mega corporations, okay, run by people who are not typically very nice or public-spirited people. They're highly acquisitive. Okay, they tend to be narcissistic, Machiavellian, sadistic sometimes. Basically, these are not all good people. I mean, there are exceptions. There's some people, that have a lot of money or are in charge of various kinds of technological enterprise that aren't totally bad people. But when you put too many of them together, they start getting the idea that they're elite and they should be in charge. And they start deciding that people are useless eaters. There are too many of them, and for the good of the planet, and really because they're a nuisance, we have to get rid of them. Right? This kind of talk has been going on for centuries. All right? A lot of people aren't aware of it, but the elite tend to form these ideations when left to their own devices. Okay, so if there's a technological singularity, with them owning all of the technology, that technology will be used against the human species. It's almost certain. And that is called a parasitic divergence, where they become a parasitic subspecies of the human race, and the rest of us become their hosts.
Now, the human singularity, it's one that you advocate for, something that we should have instead of the technological singularity. What is the human singularity?
Well, it's been laid out by others. For instance, Teilhard de Chardin. You're probably familiar with him. He was a Jesuit priest who came up with this idea of the omega point. Okay, we're approaching this quickening of consciousness where we're going to realize what we are, who we are, our relationship with God and reality, and fulfill our destiny. And this is going to be this huge worldwide global event, and it's going to save us and allow us to pass through the great filter and realize our destiny. That's what it is.
He used that term, great filter, or did you just come up with that? Great filter.
No, great filter is a term that's been around for a while. It's basically every species, as it develops technology and starts killing itself with pollution and overpopulation, all the rest of it, every species comes to a point where it either has to grow up and live sanely and sustainably in its environment, or it dies.
Part of the technological singularity, one of the reasons why people are venerating it is because there's the potential for minds to be uploaded into classical computers.
Really? And whose theory is that?
Right. This is what I want to. This is what I want to ask you about.
Okay, so why do you, there is no theory. It has no underlying.
Why do you laugh? Why is it absurd? And let's imagine that it's not classical computers that one uploads their minds to, but some other, maybe quantum computer. Why is that outrageous?
Because that's not the way reality is structured. Okay, reality exists. It exists on other terms entirely. You're not going to build a machine. It is not mechanical. It is meta-mechanical or proto-mechanical. You might be able to call it that, but you're not going to be able to use a universal Turing machine, or for that matter, a quantum Turing machine, to simulate it. It can't be done. All right? It does not satisfy the requirements for existence. There is no theory. There is no theory of transhumanism, how this whole thing is going to occur. All right, unless you can point me to a theory. Now, if you can do that, I'll change my mind. I'm an open-minded person. I don't think there is such a theory.
You just mentioned mechanical. Is this because there's a difference between mechanical causation and telic causation? Or is this unrelated to that? I have a note here.
Causation is far more primitive and generative than mechanical causation is. Mechanical causation is incoherent. You have a machine with a bunch of parts that happen to be bolted together in the right way that the machine works, performs a function the way it's supposed to, but they don't work coherently in the sense of quantum mechanics. Telic recursion is coherent in the sense of quantum mechanics. All right, so it's, everything is superposed on each other. All of the possibilities interfere within these quanta of causation called telons, which are just configurations of tellors like you.
Do you have any thoughts as to entanglement speed? So what I mean by that is some theories predict that there's a maximum speed of entanglement. Right now, as far as we can tell, there's no speed to it. It's just instantaneous. I'm curious if, in your models, it necessarily has to be the case that entanglement happens everywhere simultaneously, or if there is also a speed associated with it.
Well, you're just talking about some kind of terminal lag. In reality, entanglement occurs in the non-terminal domain where things are meta-simultaneous. It is not appropriate to try to schedule them the same way things are scheduled in the terminal domain. But there could be a little bit of a lag where, yes, there is some measurable amount of time that it takes for things to become entangled once their wave functions hit each other. That is a calculation I have not yet performed.
How does one solve the liar's paradox in your model?
The Epimenides paradox?
The one that says this sentence is false.
Right. Well, you simply exclude that kind of sentence from reality. You say, oh, that is a pathological construction that is not instantiated in the terminal domain. Unless you can find me an instantiation, and I don't think you can because it's paradoxical.
So it's akin to naive set theories move to ZFC, where they say we can't construct sets that aren't elements of them, set of all sets that aren't elements of themselves. It's akin to that. You just negate it. You say that's not a possibility.
It is a possibility. You just can't involve the negation product. You can't involve the self-negation product. You can have sets that are self-inclusive. We've got self-inclusion all over the place. Fractal geometry, there are all kinds of things. Consciousness itself, all kinds of things that are self-inclusive. But you can't allow this misuse of the negation functor. Okay, you can't allow that to intrude on them and render them paradoxical. That's what I'm saying.
Is there a realm, it's like the pre-info cognitive realm, this primordial place, unbounded telesis place, where, as far as I understand, paradox roams? It's fine. It's just in our experience, our world of the terminal.
Right. It can exist. It can exist as a syntactically inconsistent form, which is sufficiently well formed that you can apprehend it or think you apprehend it, but in reality, it is incapable of instantiation. You can formulate it, right, and then you can envision it in the non-terminal realm. You cannot, however, achieve an instantiation, an actualization of it, because it violates the terms of existence in the terminal realm, physical existence. Right.
What happens after death? So there's a couple ways to interpret that. What I mean is, let's talk about what is death. What does it mean to die?
That's the termination of your relationship with your particular physical body that you have at this present time. When you are retracted from this reality, okay, you go back up toward the origin of reality. You can be provided with a substitute body, another kind of terminal body that allows you to keep on existing.
With the same memories,
this is what religions. Excuse me.
With a modicum of your memories before, or a complete eraser.
You can have these memories can be retrieved. Nothing goes out of existence in the conspansive manifold. Your memories can always be pulled back out but there's no reason to do that usually. Okay, why cling to memories of a world in which you are no longer instantiated? So there are certain automatic psychological things that happen on death, at the moment of death. And also you mentioned what happens after death. That's not quite appropriate, of course, because that's a temporal preposition. And when you're extracted from the terminal domain, you're no longer time-like. Now you're basically metatemporal. So everything changes. However, you exist that way right now. Arguably, all of your lifetimes, if you were to be reincarnated again and again and again, all of those reincarnations are meta-simultaneous. There is a sense in which they all occur at once in the non-terminal domain.
So when people talk about heaven, which I know you have your own views, a specific differentiated view I haven't heard before as to what heaven is, and even hell. When people talk about heaven, usually what they mean is something like reinstantiation of this body with probably a better hairline than I have, and
You
a
got a
bit
great
younger.
hairline.
Oh man,
Better than mine is.
you should see Bernardo Castrop, who I should put you in touch with. Have you heard of Bernardo Castrop?
I've heard of Bernardo. Yeah, as a matter of
Wonderful.
fact, I think he was on
Hairline.
an email distribution by himself. I think it was one of Jack Sarfati's email distributions.
So who's that? Jack who?
Jack Sarfati?
Yeah.
Jack Sarfati is one of the hippies who saved physics.
Uh-huh.
You
Is
ever
he
read that
related
book?
to UFOs? Does he study UFOs?
Yeah,
or
yeah. As a matter of fact, I think he's working on right now. He's working on metamaterials that will allow us to build spacecraft that emulate Tic Tacs. Read of those Tic Tacs that
We're going to talk about that, man.
I mean, yeah, he's a gonzo physicist, right? But he's been around since the 1960s, and he and there are a bunch of other guys, like Sarag and Nick Herbert and Fred Allen Wolf and other people like this. Who there's a guy named David Kaiser, I think he's at MIT. He wrote a book called How the Hippies Saved Physics. And these were the guys, these were, non-locality and all the quantum woo you hear about sometimes came from these guys. But in reality, they had a lot of very productive thoughts. And in a way, the world we're living in now is an outgrowth of some of what they were thinking and doing in those days. Some of these guys are still around. I mean, not just Jack Sarfati, but you've also got other guys like, I know Nick Herbert is still there, and I know that Wolf is still there, Sarag is still there. These guys are on email distributions that Jack sometimes puts me on one of his distributions. And so,
I want to talk to Jack at some point. I heard that I should talk to Jack. What I've been exploring recently is the topic of UFOs, because, like this podcast is about theoretical physics, consciousness, free will, and God. And it seems like UFOs, from our observations of them, break the laws of physics as we know. So a simple one is conservation of momentum. How can you move back and forth we have to assume a certain mass is associated with the craft.
well, yes, and of course mass amounts to inertia, and that's a violation of inertia. You can't just suddenly turn on the timeline.
Right, so that's what I've been exploring.
Unless you're dealing with a projection.
Right. And
Right?
that's also called spoofing, I believe. Have you heard that term?
Yeah, I have heard the term spoofing, but you need a better theater of reality in order to explain what this kind of projection would be.
Okay, while we're here, man, let's talk about this. What are your thoughts on UFOs in general, as well as the recent disclosure movements? Is there anything about UFOs that you find convincing that they are, in fact, maybe us from the future, maybe associated with God or demons or angels, or just an advanced civilization visiting us in the same way that we house people at zoos? I mean,
Well,
animals at zoos.
they could be any or all of those things. There could be different kinds some kinds that come from the future, some kinds that come from another planet elsewhere in the universe, right? But they definitely, you've got too much reportage on them. There are too many people who are coming up with heartfelt stories about them. They can't possibly all be fake, right? People aren't liars. If someone's going to risk his reputation and be called a nut by coming out and saying, I saw a UFO, you have to take that person a little bit seriously. Sure, there are scammers out there and people who are going to lie about it, but I don't think we could have this much reportage without actually having something to it, right? So I think a lot of people are telling the truth about UFOs. That means they have to be explained, and there are a number of possible explanations corresponding to different kinds of UFO.
You mentioned the word woo about 5 minutes ago. What I'm wondering is, did you used to have a conception of what you thought was woo? So, for example, telekinesis or psychic phenomenon, maybe when you were in your teens, that now, because of your development of the CTMU, you no longer regard it as incoherent mysticism.
Well, I mean, I have had a number of paranormal experiences, and began having them at a rather young age, and that's one of the reasons I had to develop the CTM, to develop an extended picture of reality that would actually accommodate alternate states of being, alternate states of mind. And so that is, rather than dismissing the experiences that I had in the past, I've actually become more comfortable with it.
What are some of these paranormal experiences?
Well, you know, psychokinesis, telepathy, lots of precognition in my case, um, out-of-body experiences, you name it. I don't know of I don't know of a single kind of paranormal event that I haven't spontaneously experienced at one point.
Have you witnessed any UFOs on your own?
Well, yes, I have. All right, and I was basically up near. I was working for the U.S. Forest Service, and I was up near in central Montana, near Malmstrom Air Force Base, by the way, where they landed and showed up. I saw something in the sky, and actually stood and watched it for 30 minutes until I got bored and drove away. And I was driving a U.S. Forest Service pickup truck, but literally stood there, leaning against the back of the truck, looking directly at it for a long, long time. Okay, it was perfectly, it did not change shape, it did not change position. It was right up there in the sky over, they were called the Little Snowy Mountains. I was kind of in charge of this mountain range in Montana, and that's where it was. And it was huge, it was titanic. I mean, there was no missing. I don't know if anybody else saw it or not, but yeah, it was up there.
What do you
What it
estimate
was,
its size to
however,
be?
excuse me?
Sorry, what do you estimate its size to be?
You see, it's very, very difficult to tell because getting a distance fix on something like that is very, very hard. Could have been anywhere from 500 yards to 5 miles in diameter. So I don't know, but it was huge.
Was it one of the triangular
Nope.
UFOs, or was it
No.
a more disc-like?
It was oblate. It was it looked to me like an oblate spheroid. And one of the first things I thought was, well, this must be a lenticular cloud. And so I kept on looking at it to find out if it was, to see, okay, if it's a lenticular cloud, I'm going to see some sign of movement. There's going to be something there. It was nothing like that. This thing was totally solid metallic, and it did not change. I kept on staring directly at it to see if it would change. No, it wasn't change, do something. But it would. So, as I said, I stayed there for until I was quite sure that there was no doubt about it, and then I just drove away.
Can you give me an example of another paranormal experience of yours, a specific one?
Just simply all kinds. Well, the first time I had an out-of-body experience, I was lying down, and I experienced. You ever hear of nocturnal paralysis?
Yeah.
Basically, I was lying down, and I woke up, and I thought, I better, maybe I'll get up and go to the bathroom or something. So I tried to move, and I couldn't. Immediately, I started to panic.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a wall next to me. So, I figured, what's going on? And I look over, there's a bookshelf next to me on the wall, right next to my head. That bookshelf was 4 feet above the ground. Okay? In other words, somehow I must have risen above my body. I couldn't figure out how this had happened. But anyway, I thought, oh my God, am I dead? What time is it? How long have I, if I'm dead, how long have I been dead? Suddenly I floated, I began to move. I floated in from the room that I was on into the kitchen of the house that I was in, turned a corner and looked directly at a clock that was on the stove there and saw the time. And at that point, I realized, this is, basically the middle of the night, and I woke up back up in my body. I mean, it took me a little bit, and I got control of my muscles, and I walked back in, and it was 1 minute later than it was when I looked at the clock. So, of course, now some people are very good at gauging time and figuring out what time it is, but that was an exact estimate of the time after I'd been asleep for some period of time. So, that was something. Of course, it was terrifying because the first time you experience this nocturnal paralysis, you are going to be But then many of these experiences.
Have you had any intimations of God speaking to you?
Well, now you're getting a little bit, yes, I have had religious caliber visions. Okay?
Now I'm getting a little bit what?
A little bit personal. No, you're asking me to reveal some of the most personal details.
Right. If you
Okay.
want, you can be
I
general about it.
have too much experience with these despicable creatures called trolls that have been specializing in my case for this done. You admit that you had a paranormal experience, and suddenly these creatures
They're
are
looking for any reason to dismiss you.
crawling all over the internet, right, saying nasty things about you. And unfortunately, I don't know if you know anything about me, but I've been canceled. Me and my ideas have been canceled, despite the fact that they're totally provable. Been canceled for a long time because of the God thing, and also because people don't like IQ differentials. Okay, and so if there's an IQ differential, it's politically incorrect. And if you're talking about God and say God is mathematically provable on top of that, the trolls come out of the woodwork on you. Okay, and pretty soon people are reading the internet and they see all this troll nonsense, and they somehow get the idea, oh wow, well there's smoke, there's fire, so this guy must be like totally off the wall. And then they don't pay attention to you, or they think that it's somehow your ideas are somehow tainted. And so this leads to what is called cancellation or cancel culture, which in my case has been going on for over 30 years, but somewhere between 30 and 40 years. And let me tell you, I'm sick of it. Okay? There is not an academic alive that can do a thing about anything that I've ever said or done. Nevertheless, I'm not invited to conferences or symposia. I'm not invited to do media appearances. I mean, these are, things that I should have been able to, they're ways that I should have been able to spread the word about, my work and actually get it out there so that people could look at it. They were denied me. And so I'm a little bit, I don't like trolls. I don't like people that talk out of turn about things they don't understand. And there are a lot of those people out there. And unfortunately, it would be fine, I guess, if most people were able to distinguish between a troll and someone who actually knows what he's talking about. Most people can't. If the troll uses a little bit of language, well, I work at a university, and here's my opinion, and it's all nonsense, okay? Then, people think, well, he says he's from a university, maybe he really is. All right? And this is, the problem. People can't distinguish between truth and falsehood, especially when it's when it takes the form of internet noise.
What I find is that people don't go into
honey, could you get me something to drink, please?
Yeah.
Okay. Pardon me, Craig.
That's okay.
My mouth is getting dry here.
Yeah, no problem. What I find is that people dismiss intellectuals, like Stephen Wolfram, Eric Weinstein, yourself, without delving into the papers. Maybe they'll do a cursory glance at their work, quote some of it. So that if they want to look like they've read, they'll quote a few paragraphs here and there. I've seen criticisms of yours, but they haven't. See, I'll tell you, my difficulty is when I'm going into your theories or anyone else's, it takes sometimes weeks. And I try to put myself in the position where not only am I understanding it at an intellectual level, but I'm realizing it. And what I mean by realizing is I'm trying to see how what you're saying, how can I model it such that I see it completely obvious? That's how I know I've internalized a theory. And I don't see anyone who criticizes you as attempting that.
Oh, that's correct. Yeah. And basically, they claim that it's so abstract and abstruse that they can't visualize it, and that it's impossible to visualize. That's the usual line. I visualize all. It's not hard for me. But, for some reason, I think it's intellectual laziness. I think it's the idea that they don't want to become involved with something that might prove them wrong, mistaken about something. There are a number of psychological factors that go into it, but these two guys you mentioned, Wolfram and Weinstein, yeah, they may have somewhat the same problem, although they're in a better position than I am, because they've got, lots of money and they've got university degrees. I have neither of those things.
Well, Chris, if I can do something about getting you more notoriety, I will, man. If I can uncancel you, I do plan on having you on again at once I've I'm going to go through your theories more, which will take some months because I don't have only your theory. Now, I've only been studying yours for the past couple weeks, but now I have to move on to some
Well, mine's
others,
the best one.
Right. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk
Yeah.
about that at the end. Because I can get to that question right now. What I'm wondering is, I want to make sure that what I'm doing is honest and open and for the good. And I wouldn't make a claim that I'm trying to do that because that would to me mean that I'm trying to be good, which means I'm good. And I don't know if I am. I'm a bit hesitant to say that. But I'll say I'm trying to be good. Let's say that.
You haven't done anything especially bad yet, in my sight.
Thank you. However, here's where it gets bad. So, you mentioned that your theory is the only one of God that is correct. And then what I'm wondering is, does that mean when I'm interviewing other people on their ideas of God and so on, it's incorrect, which means I'm promulgating evil in some way, and promulgating incoherence.
Only if they claim they've got a true theory of everything that's totally comprehensive. Otherwise, the possibility exists that their theories or their viewpoints can be interpreted in such a theory, in a true theory of everything. You see? For example, these other guys that you mentioned, and you asked me questions about other thinkers. If, to the extent that their ideas can be interpreted in mine, of course they're not correct. But my idea is called a super tautology. It cannot be broken. Okay, the conditions for intelligibility are realized by it, which means that if you try to come up with a counterexample, it will be unintelligible and inadmissible. My theory cannot be broken. So, although these other guys don't, I'm the only person with a super tautology, but all of these people have valuable insights. So I don't think you've ever interviewed a dummy. These people actually see things. They've got insights. As long as those insights can be interpreted in the CTNU super tautology, that's okay.
Another way for people to understand what you've just said is that think of set theory as the basis by which physics comes up with their theories. And that's not exactly true. We don't axiomatize from set theory on it. But
no, it's empirical induction.
Think of it like that. What Chris is saying is that underneath first-order languages, there's a meta-language, a super tautological language, such that other theories are interpretable, almost like with physics, whatever the equation is that governs the grand unification. Let's imagine it's just a single equation. Well, that's based in axiomatic set theory. Okay, then you can take it a step back and say, what would a theory of everything at all have to look like in all of its...
In its outline is the probably the best way to look at that. The important thing is that it be comprehensive and not exclude anything that's true. All right? Nobody can present a complete, theory of everything that explains every detail of the universe right up front. The universe doesn't work that way. It is not deterministic. So there is no such theory. What you need is the outline, the very generic form in which anything that is true, that actually occurs in the universe or is relevant to the universe, can be expressed. If you've got that, then you've got a TOE. I'm the only person that has a TOE with that description. So even though it's not yet a unified field theory in the sense that most physicists would mean, unifying general relativity and gauge theory and quantum mechanics, although it comes pretty close, actually. Once I start getting into it, if I would give all the detail, it does come close in some respects to something like that, but that's not the way I present it. I'm presenting it as a super tautology, as the logical form of a theory of everything that cannot be broken. Can't get out of it. There's no escape. Nobody gets over.
I'm actually writing a book, maybe it's just for myself for now, on theories of everything. I have a chapter on yours. So as I've been studying for yours, I'm writing it. That's partly how I understand it. At one point, I'll send it to you.
Well, thank you. I would love to take a look at your chapter.
Yeah, for sure. It'll be maybe 6 pages long, so I have to condense what is about 300 pages down to 5. As well as what I'm trying to do is relate different theories of everything. And the reason I'm doing that is you yourself, you notice, I'm sure you've gone through this, where you start to make connections between what you say. Let's take an example. What you conceive of as God, and then other religions that normally would be thought of as contradictory, that not two of these could be correct because they make opposite propositions. But
Right.
you see, well, actually, there is a way in which there's an overlap, and that's probably what they're referring to is this overarching.
Exactly. There are ways, if you have a general framework that is super tautological and you know it's a fact, all you have to do is worry about interpreting these different religions in so that they're consistent within this framework. So that's what that's why I call it a meta-religion. You can take all of these other religions, that are usually at each other's throats because they don't know how to interpret their doctrines and what they pull out of scriptural documents. They don't know how to interpret that, so they end up imagining these conflicts. Those conflicts usually don't have to exist. If you have an overall framework in which the scripture and doctrine can be interpreted, they can be avoided.
Why is it that intellect is associated with atheism? Now, you may disagree, but what I mean is, in academia, there's obviously an association with intellect there.
That's a danger zone phenomenon.
Just assume that proposition is correct. You know what I'm referring to. Why is it that most smart people now think that it's smart or it's intellectual to eschew God?
Did you expect comfort?
They're dummies. They think they're a lot smarter than they actually are. That's the problem. The geniuses throughout history, if you want to look at the real geniuses throughout history, most of them believed in God. Most of them admitted that there was a higher power, that there had to be a higher power. The people who occupy universities, I'd say your average Harvard instructor, Harvard is a very good university, of course, I'd say your average Harvard instructor might go 135, 140 max in terms of IQ. That's just not smart enough to be laughing at people who believe in God, especially when you've got people like Isaac Newton, okay, that you're looking at. People like they're just thousands of them. Great geniuses that have believed in God.
Counter would be obviously that if we go back far enough in time, let's say 100 years in the or 250 years in prior, almost everyone believed in God, both what you call dummy, quote unquote, and intellectual. So to say that the higher end of the IQ spectrum believed in God previous to 250 years ago, well, almost everyone did. So then we have to look at modern thinkers. Now, you're obviously someone who's extremely bright is an understatement. Is there a correlation between those on the extreme end of the IQ spectrum who believe in God, but then those who are of higher intelligence that don't? So almost like a Dunning-Kruger, where the middle doesn't believe. You're that smart aleck teenager. But then if you gain a bit more insight, there's this false quote, I'm sure you've heard it, that says something like, the first sip of science makes you an atheist, but it's that bottom gulp that makes you a believer in God. It's a false quote attributed to, I think, Schrodinger or Heisenberg. It's false, but regardless.
It's true. Even if it's false, it's actually, there's something to it. You've got to have depth. The intelligence has to have a lot of penetration, and you've got to get the big picture before you understand that there must be a God out there, right? And a lot of people don't have that. You mentioned the Dunning-Kruger effect. All right, people imagining that they're much smarter and more competent than they are. Okay, it's usually associated with stupid people. Stupid people tend to have Dunning-Kruger, right? But there is a higher IQ version of that. It's called the danger zone effect. We've been talking about it for years. People who range in IQ between, like 130 and 150, you would ordinarily think, well, it's extremely high IQ, almost up to genius range. So these people must actually have something going for them. Well, basically, it works against them because they're right so often. Compared to the ordinary person, they almost always turn out to be smarter. This gives them the idea that they're intellectually infallible. They start to get to lose sight of their own intellectual limitations and believe that they're really what they've cracked themselves up to be. And they become insufferable at this point. This is the danger zone phenomenon. People would tend to exhibit this when they're within a certain IQ range that we call the danger zone. Like I said, it's like a two standard deviation range, right around where I said it was. Maybe I said 130. Maybe it's like 120
whatever.
to 150.
I understand.
Yeah, whatever it is.
What you're saying is that some people, because they're so smart, let's just say it's two standard deviations. They're above their peer group when they grow up, and then they think they're the smartest in the room, so then they extrapolate that and say, I'm the smartest in the world at 150.
Yeah, exactly. They were smartest in the room, but they were in a small room. Okay, then they get out there in the real world where there are people smarter, and, suddenly it's like they were scalded. Okay, I must still be the smartest person, so they start belittling and denigrating people who are smarter than they. And describes a lot of people who are regarded as very intelligent, especially in academia. They regard each other as intelligent. It's kind of a club, you know. Well, you know, anybody who's not in our club has no intelligence whatsoever. Right? This is what they believe. It's what they con themselves into believing. It's not true, but they come to believe it anyway. It's their reason. It gives them a license to exclude and belittle people who are actually smarter than they are.
Speaking on intellect, I'm sure you've heard of Stephen Jay Gould. He has some criticisms of the concept of IQ, and I took a
non-overlapping magisteria.
Meaning
basically he thought that science and religion were non-overlapping magisteria and that one had nothing to say about the other. He's a complete dualist, and his ideas, his conceptions of IQ are totally hogwash. I mean, the guy was obviously a smart guy, but he had maybe he was a danger zone person who decided that all those people who scored better than he did on IQ tests must be really a bunch of nincompoops compared to him. And that's where he got his ideas from. But he seemed to be largely motivated by ego. I got the impression that Stephen Jay Gould was a guy who thought very highly of himself and his own perspective, but couldn't really justify it. In other words, I saw him as a danger zone kind of person. Right? That's largely where, you know, a lot of this stuff, you know, and it's not that IQ is all that special. IQ is by no means the whole of intelligence. People like Gould are right about that, but it does correlate with intelligence to a certain extent. It's an aspect of intelligence. So you can't just totally dismiss it and say, well, you know, this person, despite the fact that he's got a measured IQ of 65, is just as smart as this guy with the 150 IQ over here. You can't make a statement like that, but that's what these people want to do. Everybody's equal, you know, even intellectually equal. They don't really believe that because they believe they're super smart. But when it comes to you, you can't be any smarter. It's ridiculous.
What I wonder, people who dislike the concept of IQ, mainly they dislike it because it has connotations with respect to race, and then they think eugenics is going to come out from conversations about it. Or they're not happy with their IQ, or they're afraid to find out their own IQ because it may be lower than they think. And they actually unconsciously attribute plenty to it. So there's this great quote, which is, "We mortals scorn what we valiantly strive for but don't obtain." It's from Aesop's Fables. I put that in this movie that I was directing called Better Left Unsaid. It's about, you've heard of the radical left, I'm sure you're familiar with them. So it's about what makes extremism.
Unfortunately, yes.
Because it's obvious what extremism is on the right when it comes to ethno-nationalism and so on. It's easy to identify. But it's not easy to identify what extremism is on the left because it's couched in terms of diversity and compassion and so on. So I made a film about
and usually these days, though, it's also couched in terms of Marxism, which is a very flawed philosophy. It just doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. So it's getting easier to identify the people on the extreme left.
What I would like is for someone who doesn't think the concept of IQ is important at all to say, okay, well, I give them a pool of people. Here's a pool that has people who are measured of IQ 80 to 90, and then people who have 150 to 160. Okay, are you telling me if you're running a company, you would choose equally from them? Okay, then take the 80s, take the 90s. I don't think that they actually would do so. I don't think when push comes to shove, they would put their money where their mouth is.
Unless they're practicing some form of affirmative action or have to abide by some kind of racial quota system. All right, then all bets are off. I mean, I remember when I was in New York, you know, and I needed money in New York. The rents were pretty high, so I was constantly looking for a better job. The civil service exam at the time that I was in New York, which was during the 1980s, 1990s, they spotted racial minorities, certain racial minorities, 30 points on that test. In other words, someone like could go in and score 100, but if you belong to one of these privileged minorities, you could score a 70 and get the job, right? And that's because of a basically affirmative action racial quota system, right? It's obviously not very good for our society because you've got a lot of people that really can't handle the jobs that they're given. And because of that, society deteriorates. I mean, I feel for people that are denied work, for example, because they have a low IQ. But, you know, that is not a reason to destroy a society. You can't pretend that you're being compassionate and pretend, oh, we can't hurt anybody else's feelings, and then ask them to do things, to be, doctors, airline pilots, physicists. You can't expect them to perform functions like that because you feel compassionate toward them or because you don't want to hurt their feelings, right? I mean, there has to be a point at which reality cuts in, right? So that's what we have to remember. It's not that these people are bad people or that they're not as good as other people. They certainly can be as good as other people, okay? But you got to sort of, some people are capable or better at certain things than others, and IQ is a good measure for some of those things. So, there should be, employers should be able to put a certain amount of weight on IQ. They don't, because the academic system, Academia Incorporated, has more or less shoved the IQ off the stage and replaced it with having a college degree. So now what they're looking at is, does this person have a college degree? If he has a college degree, he's smart. And if he doesn't, he's a dummy. He's one of those high school dropouts, forget about him because he's a bum. All right? That is a disservice to the world, that kind of thing, because anybody at this point can get a college education, right? It doesn't make any, sometimes I think that, I have a dog who, if I paid the money and put this dog in a class, the dog would end up with a degree, right? I mean, he can't write or spell his own name, but then again, it seems to me that some of the people who are graduating from college these days can't do that either. So you see where it's getting. It's not very good. We need to properly use our intellectual resources, and that means we pay a little bit of attention to who's good at what kind of task.
I see it from both sides, because there is, like you mentioned, it's a correlation. IQ is a correlation, which is important. It's one of the highest correlates with success in terms of money, in terms of even happiness and health.
Up to a certain point. Okay, that doesn't extend into the genius or super genius range, but it goes up to a certain level. It also correlates very highly with academic success,
right?
Which of course correlates with material
But it
success.
does not correlate with morality. So, for example, there's something called there's a psychometric. I think it's a dark triad. It's the closest to amoralistic behavior.
Right, or dark tetrad.
It's not correlated with IQ. You may think, well, the smarter you are, the more you can take advantage of people and you'd actually be more harmful to society. It turns out there's zero correlation, which is great, because that means that the smarter you are, it doesn't make you a good person. And people tend to associate intellect with moral worth, or with even human worth. I'm not sure if you do that. I see that as a dangerous game. And I also understand that if one belongs to I understand the controversy with IQ and race, because if you belong to a race that has been demonstrated to have a low IQ, or supposedly demonstrated to have a low IQ, that's debilitating to be part of that group. It's not a fun feeling to go around.
That's because you're identifying with the group. Everybody has a right to be taken, as an individual. If you have a high IQ, I don't care what color you are, what race you belong to, you deserve to be recognized for that. But if you feel that, but I'm not really me, I'm a member of this group, okay, and because this group has a low mean IQ, because it has that statistic must apply to me. No, that's not true. Never was true, okay, but the whole identity politics thing that we've fallen into leads people to take that attitude. And once again, it's counterproductive, and we have to stop it. I mean, we've got to break out of that.
That's one of my questions, was with regard to IQ and race, or just IQ in general. If you're told that you have a low IQ, let's imagine that you're an individual who has taken an IQ test. So forget that you're inferring by membership of a group, and you have an IQ of 100 or 90 or whatever it may be. How do you avoid crushing someone's spirits by that?
Well, you just tell them you tell them the truth about intelligence. There's a lot more to intelligence than just IQ. I mean, that we have examples. You take Richard Feynman, one of the best physicists of the 20th century, had an IQ of approximately 125, which isn't high enough to be a genius physicist in the estimate of most people, but it was high enough for him. Intelligence is, it comes from another place. That IQ is being able to focus all of your mental energy on specifically well-defined tasks within a certain time period. Okay, that's what it is. Intelligence need not be focused that way. Intelligence is something that can be spread out over much larger areas of space and time. People that produce works of genius don't necessarily have to produce a work of genius every time they take an IQ test. Okay, so intelligence is much more than IQ. And this is something that I think if people understood this, and I'll try to help them understand this, if they understood it, they wouldn't feel so bad about, some kid who scores, better on an IQ test than they do. They wouldn't even necessarily feel bad about belonging to a group that has a low mean IQ. You see? I mean, there are differences, between people. We're all good at certain things, we're all bad at certain things. Okay, and everybody's different. As long as we learn to accommodate those differences, but, also allowing for the way those differences affect our performance at certain tasks in real life, when we can do that, we'll be much better.
Sometimes I do this thought experiment with myself. Imagine that morality could also be placed on a spectrum, much like IQ is. Would you take a decrement to your IQ for an increment in morality?
I call it moral intelligence. I actually conflate the two. All right, you mentioned the dark tetrad, the chronological tetrad of sociopathy, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and sadism. Okay, now a lot of the elite have those. They have that dark tetrad too. They've also got, a lot of them have danger zone intelligence, and I'm not entirely convinced that there might not be a little bit of a correlation in that range between those two things, right?
Perhaps you will succeed after all.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I
This
can
looks
hear.
like the Blair Witch Project. Do you have another... do you have a...
What?
Who thinks this looks like the Blair Witch Project?
What?
With the light?
Yeah, do you have more powerful light?
Well, this is a more powerful light. It's got several adjustments.
I have a light.
Jeannie, could you put this on?
Just
please?
one more light. People need to see your beautiful face, man. With your...
Hold on.
No, I don't have a beautiful
Your
face.
hairline
Part
that
of the
rivals
problem- Matter of fact, I would like less of my face to be
You'd like darkened...
How's that?
What?
We have
You'd
this
like...
or
It's fine. It's fine. It's
that or that.
No,
Great.
that looks awful. That looks.
Okay. Do you want me to try opening the garage door?
Missouri is big on bugs. What?
Do you want me to try opening the door to see if that helps with the backlight?
I don't think it will, honey. Just
fine.
Don't worry about it.
Let her know it's fine. Also, can you thank her for me, because she's extremely assiduous. She puts so much energy and effort into speaking with...
Kurt wants to thank you, honey, for your punctilious attention to all of the details here. Okay.
Yeah, and of the species of sweetheart. She told me that you're a pussycat and to not be afraid of you when I first emailed her.
When I'm in a good mood.
Yeah, well, because from what I've seen, you were probably being interviewed by people who either you didn't like or they conveyed that they didn't like you, and so you were in a more disagreeable mood.
Well,
With me
what
or
are you
not,
talking
I'm
about?
happy.
The Errol Morris video?
I don't remember.
Well, are you talking about the? Well,
No, I don't know which one. I don't know
Okay.
which one, but I'm just saying that I thought that you'd be a combative person. She's assured me you weren't, and I'm happy that you're not.
no, I'm actually a very easy to get along with person. Although I think Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book in which I was one of the people. And it was called Outliers, and he attributed to me zero social intelligence. So that may be where a lot of people get that impression.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually rather easy to get along with, but I was a bar bouncer for 25 years, and my background, even before that, was such that I don't suffer fools gladly. So if someone wants to be an idiot, it rapidly changes my mood. And perhaps I'm not so easy to get along with. What?
You don't have the ass kiss.
I don't. There's no ass-kissing gene inside. I mean, I love to be nice to people and make people feel good, but once it becomes evident to me that someone expects to get his ass kissed, then there's a problem.
Is there a personal story about that stands out to you? Like you have one in mind?
Well, there's all kinds of, It lasted from when I was about 5 years old to when I was well out of high school. Having to constantly, I was either we came from a disciplinarian household, shall we say, where there was a certain amount of, where physical abuse was the norm to a certain extent, and that sort of got me going along a certain trajectory, and then we were usually the poorest folks in town, the poorest family in town, which caused us to get into fights with other kids. So I had to learn how to fight at a young age, and I didn't necessarily want to be bothered with that, but it's just the way things went for us. So that's what I had to do. And then when I went to get I started working for the Forest Service, working construction, things like that. Ultimately, I figured out that there was a better way to make a living, paid almost as much, but wasn't so grinding, and I could actually think about my work and things that I was interested in while I was doing it. It was bar bouncing. I worked in about 50 nightclubs over the course of 25 years or so in the greater New York area. And, it's probably the best known bar bouncer in New York for a long time. And so, physical altercation was more or less a way of life. And you meet a lot of people, and, but some of them are not especially easy to get along with, especially when they get drunk. So, there's some altercations arise. And I'm sure that affects your personality. Once you recognize that somebody is a bad drunk, whether or not he's had anything to drink, you react to him in a certain way. I'm improving, I'm not likely to punch anybody these days.
How did you choose your wife? How did you know she was the one?
Well, she was actually a member of the super high IQ community, such as it was back in the 1980s and 90s. And so I met her through one of those groups. And we, gradually, we corresponded a little bit, and things just grew from there. So I got myself a very intelligent woman. Beautiful, too.
Was there something about her that stood out to you compared to the other women of the high IQ range?
I've always been attracted to intelligent women. To me, intelligence is sexy. It makes a woman more of a woman. Not that a woman who is not so intelligent can't be sexy. I mean, that's far from the case. But it's always something to which I was attracted in a female. So that's one of the reasons that I held out for her. I mean, I was single for most of my life up until I was about nearly 50 years old.
What are your vices? What do you do that's dissolutive that you think you shouldn't, but you gain some satisfaction from it and you engage with it anyway?
My temper gets a little bit short sometimes. That's always something that I'm trying to improve. I have a weakness for certain kinds of snacks or candies like licorice. I mean, I just love this stuff. I can't stop eating it. I literally have to hide it from myself after a certain point because otherwise, I just eat bag after bag.
I'm the same way, man.
Yeah.
I know it may not look like it, but trust me,
No,
I'm meant to be
you're actually
200 pounds greater than I am. No, I'm serious. My wife, I pig out like you wouldn't. I expand my. It hurts, and I'm like, okay, that's the beginning. Let me keep eating, and then I have to fast for a day or 2 days. So I alternate between extreme. I don't know if it's great for my liver. I talked to my doctor about it. She said, your liver seems to be fine, but I go.
Yeah, but it's just that it takes sometimes days to let your digestive system catch up to everything that you put in your mouth. That's if you just keep on eating, I find myself getting in trouble if I just keep on stuffing myself for a week or two at a time. Then I got to stop eating almost entirely for the same amount of time before I'm back to normal.
I see the workout, the weights behind you. I see the gym set.
Oh, you're anytime if you ever make it to this area, definitely you're welcome to enjoy the gym as much as you want to. I like working out. It helps keep you young. I mean, after a certain point, you've got to have resistance exercise or your muscles deteriorate. You start losing muscle mass, and that's something that, fortunately, I haven't lost any muscle mass at all. And I'm probably, as strong as an athletic 20-year-old. I do military press with over 200 pounds for reps, which is very good for someone of
How
of
old
my
are you?
age. I'm 69.
Good job, man. So you don't work out because you want to keep your IQ, you work out for other reasons.
You too, believe you me, there are a lot of reasons to work out. Okay, you just keep yourself young, you keep your mind sharp, you keep up your motivation, your level of testosterone doesn't decrease, so you maintain the amount of mental aggression you need to attack difficult problems. These things are important to me, so I work out.
Okay, I wanted to get your thoughts on some other thinkers. One of the reasons I facetiously call it theomachy, which is like the battle of the gods, and the reason is that these are intellectual giants, and I'm not sure about you, but for me, I glean plenty from seeing these giants disagree with one another. It's as if I pick up nuggets from the damage of their fight, from the fallout. So, what are your thoughts on new atheists like Sam Harris? So, new atheism in general. You don't have to attack Sam Harris, although you're more than welcome to.
I don't look. There was a back in the they started publicizing me. I had a chance to get heavily publicized. I was asked to appear on TV shows as early as the late 1980s. I refused, so I simply didn't want to be involved. Then in the late 1990s, it was around 1998 when I started getting publicized. And after that, got a few media appearances, of one sort or another. But then I started, because I mentioned during some of these appearances that there was a mathematical way to prove the existence of God, I began getting trolled by atheists. And for a while, I was on a few sites that were supposedly religious sites that were dominated by Christians, people calling themselves Christians, and noticed that, they weren't protecting me from these atheistic trolls. And these atheistic trolls were saying an awful lot of bad things. And there were some that actually attacked me personally, name brand atheists who were nothing at the time, but have since become, sinisters of the new atheist movement. I'm not going to mention their names because that would be publicizing them, but they were nasty, and I didn't get along with them at all. And then, as I was trying to nevertheless get purchase for my theory, I found myself getting canceled. And there were several people, among them Richie Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, and who the hell was the other? Not Chris Hitchens, but one of
Sam
these
Harris?
other guys. I don't know if it was Sam Harris or not, but they came up with this new policy of how to deal with people who believe in God, theists. You canceled them. They must be canceled. Refuse to talk to them, right? Refuse to give them any sort of respect whatsoever, and pretty soon nobody will pay attention to them at all. And so this is what they pulled on me and my theory. And they pretty much managed to stop me dead for a long time. I'm not happy about it, and I don't like those people. I think they're intellectually dishonest. I think they're scumbags, really. Although I'm not saying that they're stupid people. Dennett, I mean, his theory is easy to pick apart. Richie Dawkins, there's nothing there. I mean, they're intelligent in a way, but on the other hand, they're not really. They don't have much penetration. They can't understand the inconsistencies in their own work. I just don't respect them very much. I mean, I've been on a couple of sites. They're just awful, the things they say about you, the things that they do. They apparently have no moral grounding. They don't believe in God, so they don't believe there's any sort of moral identity in the universe that can make them act or behave in any particular way that others find acceptable. So all bets are off. They think they can do whatever they want, say whatever they want about you, and get away with it. And that's what they have done repeatedly. I've been deplatformed. People will say things, and I will, politely refute them, but politely but succinctly, very tersely refute them, and eventually I get deplatformed because the people running the platforms are also atheistic. Okay, and these people don't hesitate to cancel you. They're just a very poor excuse. You can't run intellectual commerce under the watchful eyes of such people who are canceling you. All you have to do is mention the G word and they've got a problem with you, right? And so this is where we've gotten to today. And as far as I'm concerned, that policy of theirs where they simply refuse to converse with you, that is intellectual cowardice. You take people like Richie Dawkins, Daniel Dent, easily crushed by someone like me. I mean, they wouldn't last a minute. But they still won't talk. It's a reason. It's an excuse for them to flee. Oh well, he believes in God. What a dunce. So he's beneath our dignity. We won't shed any of our glory on him. So this entitles us to run away, and they hide in the shadows. You'll see them. I mean, they get out there in public, but not where they can really be dealt with by anybody who's smarter than they are. And that's not a very tall order at all. There are plenty of people smarter than they are.
Speaking of hiding in the shadows, you look like Russell Crowe. Is there another light? I want to prevent you from making the same mistake that people do toward you. So, for example, they'll make ad hominems. Now, I don't think Daniel Dennett or Dawkins have a low IQ. I think they're extremely intelligent people. They may not have as high an IQ as you.
Have you ever been personally insulted by them or their friends? Because until you have been, you haven't walked in my shoes.
Don't worry, man. I'm on your side, and I'll defend you.
Well, that's good. Thank you.
I'm just saying that I think your animosity toward them is from being attacked. And if they were kinder to you, I don't think that you would denigrate their intelligence.
It's been going on for 20 years. Certainly, I would have been willing, if they'd have just said, "Oh well, let's get together and I'll have a conversation." These people don't give an inch. They're haters. Okay, they hate God. Richie Dawkins, if you listen to what he says, it becomes very evident that he doesn't really have an argument against God. He just hates God. Okay, and this has been going on for 20 years in my case, and I've had it with the guy. So I don't, he's misled a lot of people. And this is something that you can go to hell for. If Richie Dawkins thinks that he's able to deal with somebody like me, man, he's got another thing coming. I mean, I'll just pluck his wings like those of a fly.
Let's speak about the concept of hell. Can you define it? Can you tell us how it's necessary?
Well, that'll be where Richie Dawkins is going. I'm just joking.
Yeah, so let's talk about the concept of hell. What is it? So some religions say that hell doesn't exist. Some interpretations of Christianity is that hell doesn't exist. Some interpretations is that it does exist, or there's a purgatory, place of purgatory, and then there's that hell is a place where you'll be tortured for a finite amount of time and then you'll be brought back, and then there's somewhere it's an infinite amount of times. What is your idea of hell derived from the CTMU?
Hell is simply the process of ceasing to exist, of being telecally unbound and having your identity destroyed because it is unacceptable to God. See, God, in the CTMU, there's something called a stratified identity. And God can be defined as the highest level of the stratified identity, the level that we all share with each other. We're all united in God. But God is good, and he must exclude evil in order to preserve the integrity of his identity. This is what he does. So if you deny God and you cut basically you're cutting your line of communication with God because you hate him so badly, then God can no longer see you, no longer wants to see you, and can no longer accept you into himself because he's totally consistent. God is totally, completely self-consistent and will not tolerate his denial. It's just not something that God can afford to tolerate, because something that is perfect cannot absorb or assimilate imperfection into himself. He can tolerate it for a while, but then after a while he's got to exclude it. All right, so this is what hell is. Basically, your own highest level of identity is telling you you can no longer exist because you're no longer in touch with me. You've cut your own identity in half. You've severed it. It's called the soul, the human soul. That's what these levels of stratified identity are. They're your soul, and once you interdict that, once you sever it, okay, you're cut off from God. That way, your own highest level of identity cannot communicate with you anymore. It can't see you. So when you die and you beg on the deathbed, please take me back in, God can't hear you anymore. It's a terrible thing, and I don't wish it on anybody. But if people understand this, and they understand this stratified identity, and they understand what God is, namely their own highest level of identity, they won't punish themselves with unbinding and destruction. Now, because that's a very unpleasant experience, everybody wants to cling to their identity in the end. It's hellish. People create their own hell by rejecting their own highest level of identity.
There's this phrase, I don't know where I got it from, but it says that hell is a prison locked from the inside.
That's correct. Well, that's a very good, very apposite quote.
Is it a place of torture? Is it a place of torment? Is it a place of infinite heat?
Oh, well, you feel tortured and tormented, that's for sure. And if your conception of hell is a place where there's a great deal of heat, then you're going to feel that too.
So you bring with it your own ideas of what hell is?
That's correct. Where else would they come from?
For someone like Dawkins, who doesn't believe in the concept of hell either, would he then experience nothingness?
Okay, well, you're right. I probably shouldn't pick on Richie Dawkins. He is what he is. But Richie Dawkins will create his own kind of hell. All right, because he will create his own kind of hell, and that is probably going to be a hell where nobody pays any attention to it. Okay? He's no longer a big shot at Oxford University. He can no longer run around telling people how much he hates God. Nobody wants to listen to him anymore. That's what will happen to Richie. That's his hell. And then finally, in the end, he'll just be melted down to nothingness. And the telesis of which he consists will be redistributed to the rest of the universe.
You mentioned God can't absorb what's imperfect because God is perfect and he needs to stay consistent. However, none of us, at least I'm not perfect, and no one that I've met is perfect. So does that mean that none of us are going to heaven? None of us will be ultimately reabsorbed back into unbounded telesis?
The world throws too much at you for you to be perfect. Okay? Nobody can be perfect in this world. To live in the physical world is to be assaulted by imperfection all the time. Things that don't suit you and cause you to react sometimes poorly. All right? So it's an oxymoron to think that God holds this against you. We all have to adapt. We all have to do what it takes to survive, and God doesn't hate us for that. All right? That isn't what makes a person evil. What makes a person evil is total denial and negation of ultimate reality and his own highest level of identity, which is God. All right? It's wanting to undo, to unbind reality, to say the name of reality backwards. That's what evil is. And that's what you get punished for. And that's unfortunately what a lot of these new atheists are doing.
There's someone like Peterson who would come out and say that, Sam Harris, you say that you're an atheist, but you say that with your words, but you don't act like that with your body, because you treat people with humanity, you are concerned with the world living and not dying, flourishing. Do you agree with Peterson saying that you can say that you're atheistic but not act it, and thus does someone get saved even though they profess atheism?
Well, yes, basically. The problem, however, is that once you've professed atheism, now you've got to get God's attention again. Okay, once you've severed your soul, once you've put a cut in your soul and you've actually cut God off, now you've got to heal that severance before God can see you again. It takes a long time. It's not going to have, oh, well, I've changed my mind. I've decided not to hate God anymore. That's not good enough. Okay, it needs to go on for a long, long time, and you've really got to try, and you've got to cry like a babe in the woods until God finally hears you again. Okay, so it's not easy. These people are hurting themselves by cutting themselves off like that. Hey, honey, is there a light over there? You know, one of those lights, those hood lights over there? Turn on that clamp light. I want to see how that influences the... This thing is getting in my eyes.
What I'm getting at is almost the opposite of not all those who cry, Lord, Lord, will be saved. So on the one end, even if you claim to be a Christian or you claim to believe in God, that's not enough. You have to also act it. And on the other end, one can say that even if one says that they're against God, but one acts kindly, one acts lovingly, then does that mean that they still can be saved? Peterson would say, now he doesn't talk about heaven or hell, but he would say that you believe in God with your body. You don't with your mind. But the ultimate test is your actions. And what I'm wondering is...
By their deeds shall you know them.
Right. So then does that mean, to pick on Sam Harris, whom I may be interviewing at some point, so Sam, if you watch this, well, this is just for fun, to pick on Sam Harris, would you say that he, in your model, will be going to heaven or hell, assuming that Sam Harris is a good person with his actions, but professes atheism vehemently with his mouth?
Unfortunately, your relationship with God cannot be feigned. When somebody is doing good acts, it could be only because they want to be recognized by others as someone who does good acts. They want the moral approval of other human beings. That's not good enough. Okay, there actually has to be the acceptance of your own highest level of identity. By the way, we have a rainstorm going on here. Now, can you still hear me?
Completely fine. Can't hear a thing of the storm.
Okay, good. Pardon me, Kurt. Go ahead.
Let's take a quote from someone who criticized you. You said, if someone denies the existence of God, then God will exclude them from reality. And then this person said, well, okay, how does Langan explain the continued existence of militant atheists like Richard Dawkins?
Well, they have a physical body. They're basically cohering to their physical body, and that's what's providing them with a continued identity. They've reduced themselves, however, to pure physicality. There's not much left of it. They've actually cut off their highest level of identity, and that will affect them when they are retracted from the mortal plane. When they no longer have a body here that holds them together, then that's it for them.
If God could not have been otherwise, like with your model, there are these meta laws that govern the universe. So it sounds to me like there is a bound to God.
God is his own bound. God is his own boundary. He's his own origin and his own boundary. And both of those things are distributed. This is part of the logical structure of the CT. Okay, both of those things are distributed everywhere because God is self-composed. He consists of himself everywhere. He is unbounded. Therefore, reality itself is unbounded in every part. That's why we have free will, among other things, and other properties that we inherit from God.
Who is or was Jesus?
Jesus, we cannot possibly know what Jesus was because historical methodology prevents us from validating everything that is written of him in the Bible. But we know what Jesus is now. Jesus is the ideal of human perfection. Someone who is willing to lay down everything and sacrifice himself for mankind. All right, that's what Jesus is. He is the image of human perfection. It is through a Jesus-shaped gateway that we can approach God. All right, we have to become perfect in order to unify with the perfection of God. So that's the way Jesus functions in the Christian religion. and the way he can function in every religion, because Jesuses are very few and far between, if you know what I mean. In Buddhism, of course, Buddhism has another central figure, who is Buddha, or Gautama Buddha, or Siddhartha. He's basically another kind of cat entirely. He didn't talk much about God, right? You can sort of infer a conscious higher reality from some of the things that Buddha said, but he didn't actually acknowledge the existence of God. He was also a rich individual that was born into privilege, and then, went around traveling and meditating and ministering to the masses and so forth. But in several ways, he doesn't quite measure up to the image of Jesus. Jesus was born poor. He didn't start out with any advantages at all. He lived like a normal man, like an ordinary human being, absorbing the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune at every turn, which is what we have to do. That's what we're expected to do. Therefore, Jesus is an exemplar for us. Whereas Buddha, technically, is an exemplar to people who are born with privilege and then want to withdraw from reality and have a meditative existence and, never mention God. So there's a little bit of a difference between the two. Now, in the CTMU, we don't discriminate against Buddha because he lacks Jesus-like characteristics. Instead, we recognize him for his strengths, what he was, which is considerable. Buddha is not a lightweight in terms of religious figures. So he doesn't suffer at all for his non-resemblance to Jesus. But if we want the ideal of human perfection, that's Jesus.
Let's get to some other intellectuals. Like I mentioned, for me, I love hearing academics speak about other academics or intellectuals speak. For example, if Russell commented on Aristotle, it illuminates not only how Russell thinks, but it gives me a new perspective on Aristotle at the same time. So I'm going to bring up a few different giants, intellectual giants, even though you may not consider them to be so, and we'll see what you think of them. Have you heard of Clee Irwin?
Yes. Are you presenting Clee as an intellectual giant?
Yes. I'm wondering what you think of Clee Irwin's theories. Clee Irwin has theories on quantum gravity. I'm unsure if you've taken a look, and as well as consciousness. So what do you think about them?
Well, Clee seems like a smart person. I don't want to say anything bad about Clee, but I will say that Clee has a lot of ideas that are very CTMU-like. And the problem with that is that I got to these ideas a long time before Clee did. And I actually had to force Clee to cite me in his most recent paper. What was the name of that paper? Reality Self-Simulation Hypothesis. Okay? Anyway, Clee has a theory. It's got a number of ingredients, some of which are questionable, some of which aren't. It's based on Garrett Lacey's E8 theory.
Right.
It's a certain symmetry group that he uses. But there are other aspects that are straight, pure CTMU. Okay? And I was simply not mentioned. Now, I understand sometimes people don't know any better. But at one time I was on every major news network in the country. There are probably relatively few people who are above a certain age who never heard of me. A lot of them have forgotten that they heard of me, but nevertheless I was still there. I think that a reasonable literature search should turn up something about the CTMU if you undertake it. If you're actually doing your job and looking for other ideas that are comparable to yours, you're probably going to bump into it. So Clee's theory is, to the extent that it resembles the CTMU, it's great. Okay? Other parts of it are questionable, but here's the key part is, Clee is missing essential structure that you need to have a working reality self-simulation hypothesis and a reasonable TOE, theory of everything. He's missing certain key ingredients that are built into CTMU structure. His theory is not a super tautology. It has to be a super tautology in order to be a true theory of everything. Right? He mentions language in his theory, and coding. He mentions a lot of things that that I introduced with the CTMU, which was the first language-like theory of reality. He mentions a lot of things, but then they're kind of haphazardly glued together, and it looks like he kind of made a snowball out of them and, threw it up in the air to see what would happen. And if he ever realizes this there, he is going to realize that he has a CTMU clone that doesn't just differ from the CTMU, but is the CTMU in different language. Okay, that is where Klee is headed. I don't want to detract from Klee. I think he probably thinks he's doing a good job. I do know that forcing him to cite me was not easy. I had a long string of correspondence. It originally happened. He introduced his paper, his new paper, and he put it up on RX Eve, I guess. It was an email distribution that I was on with 60 or 70 pretty well-known people in it. And he introduced it there as though it was just entirely his, the reality self-simulation hypothesis. And I'm like, what the hell? What is this? Because these people know me, they know who I am. So I said, wait a minute, Cleve, I've been talking about reality self-simulation for years. You're going to have to cite me. I've looked at your paper. I don't see you mentioning me here. You've got some of the same ideas in there. Went back, quoted a lot of self-simulation quotes from me. The problem was that he was trying to present it as a completely new idea for which he was responsible. It wasn't. And in my estimation, in some ways he's got it right, but in some ways he's lousing it up. Okay, and I don't want people confusing his idea of what a reality self-simulation would look like from what it really looks like, which is the way I describe it and have been describing for the last 2 or 3 decades. So I guess the final analysis is Cleve seems to be on the right track, but he's got some problems.
What about Joscha Bach and his ideas of consciousness?
Joscha Bach, like Daniel Dennett, is a physicalist. You cannot explain consciousness with physics or in a computational system. Okay, the CTMU makes use of a concept called proto-computation, which is even more general than quantum computation. I mean, there's a universal Turing machine, there's a quantum Turing machine. The CTMU actually quantizes reality in terms of what might be called a proto-computer, except that it's the entire CTMU. All of that structure has to go into this quantization. Okay, and then the universe is self-similar on that basis. Every part of it mirrors the whole. Okay, so you can't, it's a metaphysical system. You cannot explain consciousness using physics because it doesn't have the coherence that it would need. Okay, your consciousness is coherent. You are a unified entity when you perceive reality around you and when you have thoughts. You feel the unity of your consciousness. That's what I mean by coherence. A machine is not coherent. It doesn't have that coherence. All right, you've got to figure out some way of getting that coherence in there, and that's a tall order. Okay, Joscha Bach doesn't have that. Daniel Dennett never had that. There's one of the new atheists that I mentioned. These guys, they have some good ideas. I don't want to totally dismiss what they've done. Everybody has remarkable insights. Dennett writes well, but he writes like a philosopher, which is almost opaquely at times. You read some of his stuff, and people think I'm opaque. I think I'm a marvel of clarity compared to Daniel Dennett sometimes. He talks around things like a lot of philosophers do. That's a skill that they develop in academia. Joscha Bach is better than that. He actually makes an effort to explain what he's doing better than Daniel Dennett ever did. But still, he's not really getting to the root of what consciousness is, in my opinion.
And even if they're wrong, they're extremely inventive. Both Joscha Bach and Daniel Dennett.
I'm sure that they definitely have their strong points. I'm not trying to, these are not stupid people by any stretch of the imagination. It's just that they're trying to solve problems without having properly recognized the problem, and their non-recognition of certain aspects of the problem has caused their solutions to go awry.
Can we talk about this proto-computer, this proto-computation you mentioned?
Sure.
So there's Turing machines or classical machines as we ordinarily think of them, and then there's quantum computation, and then you're saying there's an even more general notion where different states of an infinite type are able to be used in the calculation simultaneously. I'm unsure. Can you please explain that some more? Because I haven't encountered that in your work.
Well, it means that basically a protocomputer is generative, which neither a universal Turing machine nor a quantum Turing machine are. You know, the universal Turing machine is, you know, that's Turing's original invention. Then you've got the quantum Turing machine, which I think was introduced by David Deutsch. You know, they both resemble each other in certain respects. They're different. The nature of the tape is different. The nature of the storage module is different. You know, the quantum Turing machine is more general and more powerful than the universal Turing machine. But what a theory of reality actually needs is generativity. All right? In other words, at the same time as new states are created, okay, new medium has to be created to go with those states. The medium is constantly being generated. Space-time is constantly being generated. These people imagine that the medium of reality is some kind of fixed array, almost like a computer display, like the one I'm looking at right now and seeing your face on. Okay? That's what they think reality is. They think it's a kind of like a display screen with little pixels, and that's speaking once again about Clee Irwin. Clee Irwin thinks that he's actually stated that reality has little tetrahedral pixels in it. Okay, that
Meaning
doesn't
it's
work.
discretized.
Huh? It's discretized, right? Right. It's discretized, and basically that doesn't work. Okay, it doesn't work for a number of reasons. One of which is relativity. You know, you don't have the proper kind of covariance and contravariance. It's very hard to make that work if you've got discretized pixels. Okay, you know, Lorentz contractions and things like that would actually have to influence the number of pixels that are activated at any one time, and that causes inconsistencies that apparently these people don't realize. There are also certain inconsistencies with quantum mechanics. But this idea of a discretized screen, Dennett has the same damn thing. He's got, well, I'll withhold. Basically, Dennett talks about a Cartesian theater, as I recall. And the Cartesian theater is something that he attempts to depart from. Nevertheless, he is a physicalist. And the physicalists do have to have something like a discretized, pixelated display, even if they describe it in terms of quantum mechanics, which is erroneous. You can't do it that way, really. Nevertheless, what reality actually needs is something that is generative and generates new space and time, even as new states of matter are generated. That's one of the implications of triality. The medium has to change along. It's even an implication of Einstein's equation. You've got a stress energy tensor on one side, and then you've got the metric tensor on the other. You see, the metric tensor being the medium and the stress energy tensor being the matter distribution. Okay, those two things actually have to be in sync. They've got to be coupled in a certain way, and these people are just not doing it. You know? They're not, approaching it in the correct way. Einstein, by the way, I can make a pretty good argument that relativity makes no sense outside of the CTN unit at all. The entire scenario, the way things are done there, the way things are coupled, the way space is coupled with time, for example, and then the way he couples objects with space-time in Einstein's equation. These things actually don't work outside of the CTN. So we need that. We need that generativity. We need telesis to be factored from the top down into space and time. And that's what neither of these other Turing machines, neither the UTM nor the QTM, does. The CTMU does do this, however, and it uses the entire structure of the metaformal system to make that proto-computer. So
there are other models of discrete space. They wouldn't call it space-time. Space-time would emerge, such as spin foam networks and loop quantum, that still have the properties of being background-free and Lorentz invariant and so on. So what about those? Would you say that those are also doomed?
You've got to have a representation. You've got to have an observer immersed in a medium of representation. And I don't see right now how you can salvage any of those viewpoints. I think that they all need to be interpreted in the CTMU in order for their good points to actually be validated. I think that as it stands right now, excessive claims are being made for them. I don't think they live up to those claims. I think that if I were questioning any of these people, I don't think that they would be able to justify their claims. There's just no damn way that you can have a non-generative display. Okay, so and that's, once again, we're referring to the reality self-simulation, which can be likened to a computer. There is an analogy. It's a little bit more involved than you might suspect, but nevertheless, you can separate the display from the processor. Okay, and these people are all making assumptions about the nature of the display and the nature of the processor, and usually what they're trying to do is confine everything to the display. Okay, and for various reasons, this is not allowed. This cannot be. You can't pull that off. All these guys are trying to do it. Bless their hearts. They've got a certain amount of good insight, but they're just not pulling it off.
Let's get to the next one. How about Eric Weinstein's geometric unity? What are your thoughts on that?
Eric Weinstein. Okay, geometric unity. That's where he's got That's where he's got a triangle that has the Dirac equation, spinors, and spin 1.5 matter particles on one vertex, and on another vertex he's got general relativity, and on the other vertex he's got the standard model with SU3 times SU2 times SU1 gauge theory, right? Okay, I think that Eric is actually, he seems like a very bright guy. I remember when he had his I think, isn't he the guy who had the mathematics encyclopedia up for a long time on the web? It was Eric Weinstein, some guy named Eric Weinstein had a math encyclopedia up on the web, and you know, it was pretty impenetrable. I mean, if you didn't already know the math, you weren't going to get anything out of this encyclopedia. But nevertheless, it was good. But anyway, here's the strength of his approach, this geometric unity. Basically, he seems to be saying, it sort of occurs to me that what he's saying is, well, we're having a hard time putting together a POE, a purely analytic algebraic POE, so let's look at the geometry of these theories, of the Dirac equation and the standard model and general relativity, and let's see if we can put those geometries together. And if we can merge those geometries, then guess what? We're going to automatically just be able to match it with a global formal theory coupled with the geometry. Okay, and this is it's really kind of an innovative way to approach it. However, it's the way I've been approaching it for decades. The CTNU is logico-geometry. It's a coupling of logic and geometry, but it's generative geometry, okay, which is a fundamentally different kind than what I think Eric Weinstein is doing.
Stephen Wolfram's theory of everything, the Wolfram Project. What are your opinions on that? Have you taken a look?
Stephen Wolfram, he's obviously a very bright guy. He knows a lot about mathematics. He's kind of an adorable character. The way what he's done, what it seems to me that he's done, is he's tried to identify certain basic elements and rules of assembly, and then, like a bunch of tinker toys, he's trying to assemble those into the overall structure of reality. And I appreciate that, and it's entertaining to read Stephen's writing about it, and there's a lot of insight there, but it doesn't work, because if you're going to have a theory of everything, you need to start with everything. All right, you're not going to take a subset of everything and then put it together and get something which is reality, which is more than the sum of its parts. You're not going to do that. You've got to start with everything, which means you've got to start with cognition and perception in general. You've got to logically induce your theory from that. Okay, and that's the way to build a theory. But as far as Stephen's writing is concerned and the other aspects of what Stephen does, I think he's a very bright guy. I get a big kick out of reading what he writes. But this is more or less right up front for me. The fact that he's going about it in the wrong way. He hasn't seen the big picture. He doesn't understand all of the criteria that have to be satisfied in order to have a TOE. That's where you got to start. You got to start with everything. Nothing can be excluded, either implicitly or explicitly. You've got to have everything. You've got to have everything condensed or encapsulated somehow in some kind of process. And for us human beings, the process is cognition and perception. You start with those, and then you build your reality out of that.
What about Donald Hoffman? Have you taken a look at his theories on consciousness and conscious agents interacting and so on?
Well, no, yes, I did. I think I watched a video with him and Deepak Chopra, and at one time, and I found him interesting. He's saying that basically cognition is deceptive. It's a cognitive science, as I recall. He's saying that some aspects of how we see the world is actually quite deceptive, but adaptive. In other words, it helps us adapt and survive to the world if we actually don't see it correctly. He's got this idea of a kind of a graphic user interface that actually allows us to have cognition that is deceptive, but nevertheless adaptive. And basically what Donald needs is he needs an overall framework in which to insert his GUI, his graphic user interface. He needs the actual reality self-simulation principle to make that work. He's a guy who is very much in need of the CTNU. Of course, he's an academic, so he probably would insist that it come from another academic. But if that were to happen, it would be called plagiarism. So I doubt that he's ever going to get to the true heart of things, get really where he's trying to go, simply because I'm not a member of the club to which he belongs and in which all of this stuff comes to light.
Okay, how about David Bohm? So how your theory compares and contrasts with David Bohm's theories, which I would like you to explain implicate order to me because I haven't had a chance to look it up. And then there's someone named Henry Bergson, which is related to Bohm. Now, I'm not sure how they differ, but you can elucidate me and the audience at the same time.
So Bergson is a great philosopher, so he's one of the best. And as a matter of fact, some of what he had to say about manifolds I find quite interesting because it very closely parallels what has to be done in what had to be done in the CTNU with creating the medium of reality. As far as David Bohm is concerned, his reputation precedes him. There was an early Bohm and a late Bohm. The early Bohm was Bohmian mechanics, and then later on he came up with something called the holo movements, the holographic universe. I think he wrote a book on the holographic universe with Basil Hiley. Yeah, it's Basil Hiley. Anyway, he has this thing that he calls the holo movement that basically takes an implicate order and kicks out an explicate order. That is pure CTNU. Okay, this is that process is what the CTNU calls involution. It's one of just one aspect of the CTNU, but that aspect he actually captured very well with that holo movement, implicate and explicate order thing that he's doing with later Bohm. As far as the earlier Bohmian mechanics is concerned, that's dicey. Hard to make that work.
Would the implicate order be associated with descriptive containment and then the explicit is topological containment, or there's no relation?
Explicate order is the display, the terminal display or the CTMU semi-language LO, and the other part is the CTMU semi-language LS, which corresponds to the processor instead of the display. That's the implicate form. Okay, it's implicated. It's in implicate form there in the processor, where things are actually getting non-locally combined and entangled, and telons are working to actually determine overall causal patterns. That's why that's occurring. It's all extremely. It's very, very interesting. Bohm actually matured as a thinker a very great deal in the course of his life. He had a couple of things I don't like. I think Bohm was a communist, wasn't he?
Right, and that may be one of the reasons why Bohmian mechanics came out of favor, because it was as if you were supporting communism.
Right. Well, communism is Marxism is a very bad theory of philosophy. It's got a lot of holes in it. It's just awful in certain respects. So when you see a brilliant thinker like David Bohm grabbing a hold of it and embracing it, this can't help his reputation. You see, I think Bohm suffered a great deal because of that, but you can certainly understand why it happened.
Yeah.
As far as Bohmian mechanics is concerned, he's basically trying to concretize everything. He's got a pilot field. He's got the Schrödinger equation, but he's also got this. The pilot field is actually guiding the particle to its destination. But what is guiding the pilot field itself? There are a number of philosophical questions that could be asked about Bohm's theory that reveal that it is indelibly associated with the terminal side of the reality of self-simulation. So in other words, it's terminally confined in CTMU terminology, which means that it's not really any kind of complete interpretation of quantum mechanics.
I've been told I need to learn more about Bohmian mechanics and Bergson if I'm going to be investigating theories of everything.
A lot of people really like Bohmian mechanics because of its strong points, and it does have strong points, but it won't really do in a theory of everything. The theory of everything relies on Bohmian mechanics. It's toast. There's just not enough there to pull it off. As far as Bergson is concerned, it's like a fine philosopher.
Okay, how about Douglas Hofstadter's strange loop idea of consciousness? Gödel, Escher, Bach, I'm sure you've heard of that book.
Yes, yeah. I think I was probably in my early 20s when I got a copy of that book, the strange loops and the pushing and the popping and all that stuff. Quite an intriguing book. Very much in fashion for a long time. Sort of a precursor to the reality of self-simulation in some ways. But yeah, Hofstadter was definitely an intellect worthy of respect.
People ask me, who do I want to interview most? Douglas Hofstadter's up there, Penrose is up there, and even Eminem.
Roger Penrose is brilliant good.
Where do you see Douglas Hofstadter's theory lacking, and what do you like most about it? So what dislikes, and then like pros and cons.
Well, he relies a lot on computational principles, and I think he might be, nevertheless, even though he's relying on a lot of advanced logic and, powers of meta languages and levels of computation and so forth, he shows no sign of being anything but a physicalist in the sense that it's all computational, and computation is a mechanical process. So it looks to me like it might be, like his outlook may be basically mechanistic.
Right.
Right, which, I can't agree with because that's not what reality is in CTMU.
Now, Penrose seems to agree with you in saying that there are many paradoxes associated with thinking that consciousness comes from something that's computational. Have you heard much about Penrose's theory of orchestrated objective reduction and so on with Hameroff? Yeah.
Hameroff is on a lot of these, or at least was on one time on a lot of these distributions that I find myself on occasionally. And, there is something to it. Hameroff identified microtubule cytoskeletons as being a place where quantum coherence might actually be able to function in the brain. And there are other ways that quantum mechanics can insert itself in neural processes as well. But of course, he relies on Penrose for most of the physics and actually, figuring out where it's all coming from. Penrose has this idea of a Platonic realm, or this Platonic form of reality. It's a tripartite form of reality. There's these mathematical truths that exist as these fully formed mathematical objects in the Platonic realm, and he doesn't have the CTMU. Roger Penrose doesn't have a fully formed theory of reality, but he's just very hard not to appreciate because he's so brilliant. The guy can, it's just his brilliance will almost floor you sometimes when you read some of the things that he writes. Mathematically, he's a brilliant mathematician. He's a brilliant physicist, and this idea of his that basically it's not just computation, that there's something that is undecidable going on in human thought. That basically, what Gödel theory implies. He says there's no. You've got a system, there's certain, a system that actually is capable of transfinite induction and is truly interesting. There are truths that cannot be derived from a finite set of axioms in such a system. Okay, so basically what Penrose is saying, he's saying that human thought somehow generates undecidable theorems that are true on a meta-mathematical level, but cannot be derived from any theory. This is exactly what the CTNU says. I started publishing in the same year, I think. He came out with, I think his biggest theoretical statement was The Emperor's New Mind. Recognize that title?
That's right.
Okay, that was 1989, which is when I wrote The Resolution of Newton's Paradox. So we started publishing at about the same time. He got a hell of a lot farther than I did in that amount of time. Then again, he wasn't cancer. Teaching at Oxford, does a very great deal for when it comes to disseminating your work.
How about Thomas Campbell and his My Big Toe? Have you heard of that?
I've heard of My Big Toe, but let me defer to you. You probably know more about it than I do. What does it say exactly?
It's a strange theory. Essentially, that there's another realm. When you mention that there are that there are data points that come to us instantaneously, in this non-terminal realm. Thomas Campbell also says that that's the mechanism by which psychic phenomenon work, that it occurs to you instantaneously. We think that it has to travel some distance in the same way that it would have to travel in our space-time, and there's a finite speed. He says no, that this other realm where consciousness operates is...
Well, that sounds very CTMU.
He also has Aum. He calls it Aum, which you call unbounded telesis. He has Aum, unbounded absolute oneness, or absolute unbounded oneness.
Is that supposed to sound like Om?
No, well, as far as I know, it's a coincidence. Anyway, he says that that's the fundamental constituents, this place of complete potential.
Yes, that's CTMU consistent. Yes.
Although he says this, which I disagree. He says that unrealized potential is trying to do is to create order and to decrease its entropy. And I quibbled with him because I don't think that order and entropy are what people claim in common parlance. Entropy and order and disorder are not actually... High entropy doesn't mean low order in the way that most people think. And it's obvious because if you look at a coffee cup with some milk and you create some turbulence, that looks completely disordered. And then when you stir it, then it looks uniform, it looks ordered, but that actually has the highest entropy. So
yeah, you've seen those little machines where you turn the crank, and these two, these seemingly chaotic patterns are created between two differently colored gelatinous liquids. But then when you turn it in the other crank in the other direction, it's restored to a complete state of separation.
That sounds like Maxwell's demon.
It's amazing to watch.
That's Thomas Campbell's.
Okay, well,
reminds me of yours, though yours is more rigorous.
Yeah, I mean, mine actually has structure, mathematical structure to it. But it sounds like he's coming up with some good ideas that are on the right track and can be successfully interpreted through theory.
He also had out-of-body experiences, and he would suggest that people who are younger are more in tune, or more naturally in tune, like you get out of tune as you get older, with this other realm, and so you can go, and what you think of as thought space is actually a real space, but it's another space. I wouldn't use the word dimension, but it's another realm, let's say, a primordial realm.
Right, it's another terminal realm. Like I say, that's always a possibility to create terminal realms that are not identical to physical reality, and that may be related more or less tenuously to it, but aren't dependent.
Okay, how about Noam Chomsky? What do you agree with him about and then disagree with him about?
Well, back when I was first developing the CTMU, Chomsky was one of the people I had a correspondence with. It was very brief, maybe 3 or 4 emails, and he didn't understand a word I said. Even though I was using, his theory of grammar,
generative grammar, right?
Generative grammar hierarchy. Nevertheless, actually making a metaphysic out of that was something that Noam couldn't wrap his mind around. I don't know whether it was because I was just explaining myself poorly or whatever, but Noam was a big nothing burger for me. I couldn't, even get a conversation started. It seemed to be, he has a certain perspective on language, and it's all about, where does it come from? How do we get it? And, that's his focus. And when you try to, broaden the focus, I think that sometimes Noam just doesn't pick up on it, what I'm saying. And he's a brilliant guy, but, that was my experience with him. The other guy was John Wheeler, who pretty much loved the CPU.
Oh, he
wanted to meet with me, asked to meet with me at Princeton, but I had a couple of jobs and I couldn't get away. So it was a mistake. I should have, given up the damn jobs and just gone to see Wheeler anyway. But that's not the way it worked out.
With regards to Chomsky not understanding the theories, I think that you overestimate the intelligence of the average person trying to understand your theories, or you're too close to it, and that leads to frustration on your part and the people trying to understand it because they feel
you think I overestimate their intelligence or underestimate?
I think you overestimate by thinking that it's simple. And the reason I say that is Eric Weinstein also does something similar with how he explains his theory. He doesn't seem to get that the way that he explains it is esoteric, and I wouldn't call it opposite. It's almost like obscurantism, though he's not trying to be. And I'm not accusing you of that. Please don't take this as any slight. I'm just saying that I think you may be too close to it to understand the frustration of people who actually they're not trolls, some of them are, but they genuinely want to understand and they feel like it's impenetrable. The reason I say this is because it's hard for me to understand too, and I actually have a contact on your side, speaking to him on a daily basis. So I'm lucky that I have some physics and math background, so it's easier for me than the average person, but I still had a difficult time with it. And
what is the name of the person with whom you've been communicating?
His name is Sam Thompson.
Ah, yes, Sam is a mathematics student. He's actually pretty smart.
Yeah, I love Sam. Me and Sam have been speaking almost each day. I actually had to get him on WhatsApp so I could speak.
He's a big, tall kid with red hair.
I don't know if he's tall. I only spoke to him through a webcam, but he's such a nervous person, but he's a sweetheart, and he's extremely insightful, and he understands your theories almost inside and out.
He's a mathematician. I mean, he's smart.
Okay, we'll get on to the next one. Jordan Peterson, where do you agree, disagree? So it could be with